Hey guys, tonight we're going all the way back to a myth so petty, so wonderfully overblown. It all starts with a wedding invitation, or rather a lack thereof. You find yourself not in your bed, but in a golden field, high on Mount Olympus, surrounded by the scent of ambrosia and the clinking of goblets. You hear laughter, music, and the soft rustle of toga fabric. The gods are throwing a wedding. Thetis and Peleus are tying the knot, and it is lavish, even by immortal standards. You step closer. Tables piled with honey-glazed figs, roasted meats that never cool, fountains of wine that never run dry. Everyone is radiant, glowing with divine light. Everyone except one. Eris, the goddess of discord, is not on the guest list. She shows up anyway. You don't notice her at first. She's quiet, unimpressed. But then she slips something onto the banquet table. A small, golden apple. Shiny, perfect. You lean over. It's engraved with 3 simple words, "To the fairest." And that's when you realize, this is not going to end well. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. So drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The apple sits there, innocent, and then Aphrodite sees it. She lifts it gently, turning it in her hand. Hera, sipping something bubbly and celestial, glances over and raises one eyebrow. Athena, sharpening a butter knife, notices the tension. The air goes still. You can practically hear the sound of an ancient, metaphorical shoe dropping. Eris smiles. That slow, smug kind of smile you only wear when you successfully planted an emotional time bomb. Now, these goddesses, let's just say, they're not the type to shrug things off. Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, long-suffering wife of Zeus. Aphrodite, goddess of love and glamour, always camera ready. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, practical sandals and all. 3 wildly different vibes. One apple. One very subjective claim. Fairest. You sit down on the soft grass, watching the drama unfold like the world's most passive-aggressive soap opera. Zeus, ever the coward when it comes to conflict resolution between the women in his life, sees the argument forming and immediately ejects himself from the situation. His solution. Delegate. Let's find someone else to decide who's the fairest. That someone is Paris, a mortal, a shepherd, a Trojan prince, technically, but currently busy avoiding palace drama by living in the hills with his sheep. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects actual societal values or us divine fan fiction taken too far. But either way, Zeus' plan is simple. Let Paris decide. Let a mortal tell 3 immortal goddesses which one is prettiest. What could possibly go wrong? You are now trailing behind Hermes, who's been roped into escort duty. He zips down from Olympus, wings fluttering, and whisks the 3 goddesses away to the mortal realm. No announcement, no warm-up, just straight to awkward. Paris is not ready. One moment, he's tossing an apple to his favorite sheep. The next, he's face to face with 3 deities demanding judgment. It's the worst kind of beauty contest. No exit strategy. No judges panel. Just one poor guy and 3 very persuasive arguments. As you settle under a cypress tree and watch Paris blink in confusion, you notice Hera stepping forward first. She's composed, regal, practically glowing with righteous entitlement. She tells Paris, in her smoothest, most queenly voice, that if he picks her, she will make him king of all men, ruler of the known world, power, fame, armies. She promises it with the kind of certainty that makes you think she's already written the thank you speech. Paris nods, slowly. He doesn't look convinced. You can practically hear him doing the mental math. Power, or maybe, what were the other options again? Athena steps up next. Her pitch. Battle glory, supreme wisdom, strategic brilliance. Basically, she make him unbeatable in war and pub trivia, which sounds amazing. Sure, but Paris is still Paris, a lover, not a fighter, and he's starting to sweat. Then comes Aphrodite. No speeches, just a soft smile, a casual toss of her golden hair, and one killer offer. She will give him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris doesn't even blink. He gives her the apple before the others have time to protest. You watch Hera's face, calm, unreadable, but only on the outside. Internally, the sky rumbles a little. Somewhere, a temple cracks. A fruit bowl topples in slow motion, because Hera does not take rejection well. And this, you realize, is not just about beauty. It's not even about Paris. It's about the beginning of something slow and petty and vengeful. And yes, ultimately, it will spiral into a decade-long war. But right now, in this moment, it's just a goddess, an apple, and the taste of rejection that's going to simmer for quite a while. The air shifts again. The goddesses vanish. Paris is left with an apple-shaped problem and a future that's about to get a lot more complicated. And you gently roll to your side in the dreamlike grass, listening to the first stirrings of discord bloom. You're still on that hillside, sunlight filtering through the olive trees, but the mood has changed. Paris holds the golden apple like it might burn him, though it's Aphrodite's favor that really seals his fate. He doesn't quite realize it yet, but by choosing love, or at least beauty, over power and wisdom, he has inadvertently triggered a chain of events that will unravel kingdoms. You stroll beside Paris as he ambles downhill, back toward his quiet shepherd life. Or so he thinks. But the wind seems to carry whispers now. The sheep give him side eyes. Even the rocks seem judgmental. And high above, in the cloud-thick halls of Olympus, Hera is pacing. Let's talk about Hera for a moment. She's not just the wife of Zeus, though that alone would make anyone cranky. No, she's the goddess of marriage, of loyalty, of structure and ceremony. She is, essentially, the divine version of the world's most no-nonsense aunt, the one who makes passive-aggressive toasts at weddings and remembers every slight from 200 years ago. And she just lost a popularity contest to her husband's illegitimate daughter, with the prize being a mortal boy's compliment and a suspiciously shiny apple. Hera's not furious. Not yet. That would be too straightforward. No, what she is, what she excels at, is long, slow-burning resentment. You can practically hear her strategizing, not yelling, just arching one elegant eyebrow and deciding, this will be addressed. And from her balcony, she watches Paris descend, watches him daydream about the reward Aphrodite promised. The most beautiful woman in the world, she said. Well, that's Helen, Queen of Sparta, married. And this, dear listener, is where things start to shift again. You float gently above the Aegean, gliding towards Sparta where Helen lives in perfumed luxury, blissfully unaware that her name is about to become synonymous with one of the longest, sleepless wars in ancient history. Historians still argue whether Helen ever truly existed, or if she was a metaphor for diplomacy, for beauty, or simply for blame. But in this version, she's real, real enough to turn heads at dinner and spark ships into motion. Paris arrives in Sparta under the guise of diplomacy. He brings gifts, silks, perfumes, compliments rehearsed in the mirror. Menelaus, Helen's husband, receives him politely, perhaps too politely. You imagine him as that host who knows something's off but can't quite place it, like when your dog won't stop growling at a new guest. Paris and Helen meet. Maybe there's chemistry. Maybe Aphrodite sprinkles a bit of divine fairy dust to smooth things along. Either way, the two fall into a kind of trance. Beautiful people doing reckless things. The mythological version of starting a dramatic vacation romance with your Airbnb host spouse. And then one morning, Helen is gone. You wake with the palace. There's shouting, empty chambers. Menelaus's sandals squeak dramatically down the marble halls. A necklace lies on the floor, Helen's. And all that's left behind is a scent of foreign cologne and half a goodbye note. You trail Menelaus as he stares at the horizon. There's no rage. Not yet. Just disbelief. He calls for messengers. He drafts letters. He files an official complaint with every kingdom that still uses wax seals. Bureaucracy first, vengeance later. Meanwhile, Hera sits comfortably in her throne, watching this unfold like she's halfway through a binge-worthy series. Paris has chosen beauty over politics. Helen has chosen drama over duty. And now the chessboard is set. But Hera isn't done. No, she's barely begun. Because while Aphrodite may have won the contest, Hera plays the long game. She doesn't throw thunderbolts. She doesn't curse crops. She undermines. She whispers into dreams. She nudges generals into bad decisions. She makes your horse limp the night before battle. It's not her fault, of course. It's just fate. Back in Troy, Paris arrives with Helen in tow. The Trojans are conflicted. There's admiration? Yes, she's luminous, in a sort of sleep-deprived socialite way. But also, she's married, and Greek, and famous for being the wife of a very important man who's now very upset. Still, Paris insists it's fine. Aphrodite said it would be. Hera, however, has other plans. You spend the next few days drifting between palaces. In Sparta, Menelaus summons his brother Agamemnon, who immediately starts sharpening swords and blaming everyone within arm's reach. In Troy, King Priam politely wonders if Paris could maybe return Helen before things escalate. Paris says no, dramatically, and Hera, she's already whispering in Agamemnon's ear, hinting that this could be his chance to unite all of Greece under one command, which sounds noble, but really, it's just convenient vengeance served under a flaky puff pastry of heroism. One historical fact to note: ancient Greek society did see honor and pride as political currency. An insult like stealing someone's wife, especially someone important, wasn't just personal, it was national. Hera uses this to her advantage like a pro. But here's the fringe detail most myths skip. Hera also had a favorite city, Argos. She favored its people, its politics, its temples, and she very much disliked seeing Trojan wealth rise while her favorite Greek cities felt insulted. So maybe, just maybe, there's a deeper layer to this jealousy over a fruit bowl. Maybe it's about divine turf wars, mythological zoning disputes. Back in Troy, Helen adjusts uncomfortably to palace life. She's pampered? Yes. Adored, even. But the walls whisper, the staff gossip, and Paris starts to realize that a goddess's promise doesn't always equal long-term compatibility. Still, it's too late. The ships are gathering, banners unfurl, and in the clouds above, Hera smiles, the kind of slow, smug smile worn by someone who planted an emotional time bomb and now gets to watch it tick. You wake up to the sound of sheep bells, again, but this time they belong to someone else. You're wandering through the meadows of Troy's hillside, watching Paris practice his heroic poses in front of a puddle that he's trying to convince himself is a reflecting pool. He's draped in silk, his hair a little too perfectly tousled, and you can't help but think, maybe Aphrodite oversold him. Helen is nearby, reclining under a fig tree. She looks tired, not dramatic, not tragic, just someone who is slowly realizing that living in a romantic epic is not the same as reading about one. You sit beside her in the soft grass. She doesn't speak, but the sigh says enough. Meanwhile, Mount Olympus is anything but relaxed. Hera is up early. She's reorganizing her divine to-do list. Item 1. Ensure that Paris's new relationship remains diplomatically disastrous. Item 2. Convince Zeus to stay out of it. Not hard, considering Zeus is pretending to be a swan in Thessaly again. Classic. Now, if you thought Paris choosing Aphrodite was the end of the tension, oh no, that was just the spark. Hera, ever the schemer, has plenty of kindling left. She begins by recruiting allies. You follow her across Olympus as she visits her divine contacts like she's planning a gala, except instead of flowers and wine, she's choosing vengeance and inconvenience. Athena, still bitter from losing the apple herself, joins Hera instantly. She's practical, efficient, and very interested in seeing Troy fall, preferably in flames or spreadsheets. Poseidon is an easy sell to. He's always been a little anti-Troy, especially after the Trojans stiffed him on payment for some construction work. You didn't expect ancient sea gods to worrying about invoices, but here we are. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect real city-state alliances or were retrofitted to justify Greek biases later. Either way, the divine roster is being filled like it's a fantasy draft, and Hera is already drawing up the plays. Back in Troy, the mood is changing. The city's elders are starting to frown more often. There are meetings, long ones, where nobody says Helen's name out loud, but they all mean her. You drift through their whispered concerns. Trade is slowing. Diplomats are stalling. Neighbors are sharpening their spears a little more openly. Meanwhile, Helen continues to exist in a kind of gilded limbo. She's technically a queen, technically adored, but only when the curtains are drawn. You find her once in the palace garden, gently rearranging a bowl of fruit. She picks up a pomegranate, stares at it, and mutters something about apples that you don't quite catch. Paris is blissfully unaware, or pretending. He's planning some kind of poetry contest in Helen's honor, which sounds romantic, except most of the entries are his. You drift forward in time, just a little, until you find yourself in a war council in Sparta. Menelaus and Agamemnon, polished and fuming, are planning something large, something very Greek, something with boats. And Hera, she's there too, not visibly, of course, but every time Agamemnon raises his voice, every time a messenger says honor, you feel her influence coiling gently through the room. It's not manipulation, exactly, more like divine momentum. One quirky detail, Hera is said to ride a chariot pulled by peacocks. Peacocks. You picture her descending dramatically from the clouds in full regal fury, feathers flaring, the world's most vengeful bird mom. Honestly, it fits. Soon enough, the call to arms is sent across Greece. You walk alongside heralds galloping through villages, shouting about honor, stolen queens, and uniting the Greek cause, which seems suspiciously convenient for Agamemnon, who's been waiting for an excuse to centralize power like it's on sale. Back on Olympus, Aphrodite catches wind of Hera's scheming. She's lounging in a bath made of roses, of course, and she's annoyed. Not scared, just mildly inconvenienced. She starts calling in favors too. Ares, her on-again off-again war boyfriend, is more than happy to support anything that involves violence and dramatic stares. The sides are forming, not just on Earth, but in the heavens. A mythic relay race of pride, pettiness, and increasingly creative sabotage. The apple wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration. And Hera, she's patient. She doesn't rush. She just watches as the mortals scurry to catch up with the divine feud they'll never fully understand. Her eyes narrow as she peers down at Paris again, still humming to himself while composing a ballad called Ode to a Woman Who Might Regret This. The gods are choosing teams. The mortals are packing swords, and the sea wind begins to change. And you lie back in the grass once more, the sky growing dim, and you think, this all started with a fruit bowl. You're perched now on a sloping meadow overlooking Troy, watching the sun creep up behind the city's famed walls. Walls, you've heard, that Poseidon himself helped build, though he still grumbles about not getting paid. You're not sure what currency gods accept, but apparently eternal gratitude wasn't enough. Down below, Paris is basking in the glow of his controversial celebrity. He struts through the palace corridors in gold-trimmed robes, grinning like a man who truly believes the city's growing tension is just background music to his love story. You trail after him as he visits the stables, the practice field, the perfumers, everywhere except the war council chambers, where the grown-ups are panicking. The tension in Troy is now a quiet, humming thing. You can feel it in the way the guards tighten their spears, and how the merchants lower their voices when Helen walks by. She still glows. Helen always glows, but her smile these days flickers more than it shines. Back in Sparta, preparations are escalating. Ships are being built by the dozen, shields burnished, oaths renewed. The Greek kings have rallied under Menelaus and Agamemnon, not just for honor or brotherhood, but because, let's face it, some of them were itching for a reason, especially Odysseus, who tried to fake madness to get out of going. You watched him yoke a donkey and an ox to the same plow, sowing salt like a man possessed, until someone threw his infant son in front of the animals. Odysseus swerved, busted, Now he's reluctantly on board. You wander the beaches where these ships are gathering, the air thick with the scent of tar, salt, and ego. Here drifts overhead in the form of a cool breeze, unseen, unfelt, but oh so present. Every hesitant commander, every stalling wind, it's her work. Which brings us to the hills above Aulis, where the Greek fleet is stalled. Hundreds of ships, sails furled, warriors pacing like bored lions, and no wind, not a breeze. The sea is still as a painting. Here is doing. See, Agamemnon made the mistake of bragging, always a risky move in a pantheon that loves irony. He boasted he was as skilled a hunter as Artemis herself, bold and dumb. Now Artemis, offended, demands a sacrifice to let the wines return. A very specific sacrifice. Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. You walk with Agamemnon through his silent camp, hearing the weight of that choice press down on every footstep. Kill his daughter and get wind. Refuse, and doom the invasion. A classic no-win scenario, courtesy of divine office politics. Historians still argue whether this reflects actual human sacrifice myths or just metaphorical storytelling to frame the moral costs of war. Either way, it's haunting. Agamemnon lies. He sends for Iphigenia under the pretense of marrying her to Achilles. She arrives glowing with bridal nerves. You stand beside her, watching her touch her hair, and ask if Achilles likes Lila. You know she won't make it to the isle. Even Hera pauses. For all her scheming, there's a stillness here, an understanding that sometimes mortals are too brutal even for the gods to watch closely. Some say Artemis intervenes at the last moment, swapping Iphigenia for a deer, whisking the girl away in a shimmering cloud. Others insist the blade falls. Scholars debate it endlessly, but tonight, under the stars, it feels better not to know. What matters is, the wind returns. Thousands of sails ripple like white feathers. The sea breathes again. You lift gently into the air, carried by that divine breeze Hera has finally allowed. The fleet moves forward. Slowly, steadily, an entire war begins to unfurl across the wine-dark sea. Back in Troy, Paris is arranging a poetry night. Helen is rearranging the fruit bowl, and the walls of the city don't yet know they're about to become a legend. And Hera, she watches it all from above, sipping nectar from a golden cup, the faintest smile curling on her lips. She didn't start the war, technically, but she did hold the door open for it. And now, as the first drumbeats sound across the Aegean, she settles into her throne and begins to keep score. You're hovering now above the sea, your feet just skimming the waves, as the mighty Greek fleet churns steadily toward Troy. The sails are snapping crisply in the now cooperative wind, and warriors below you are singing, sharpening blades, arguing about ration portions, all under the illusion that this war will be swift, heroic, and over by autumn. But you, of course, know better. On Mount Olympus, Hera observes it all like someone watching their sourdough rise. Slowly, with quiet satisfaction. She's not meddling today. She's already done enough. The apple worked. The sacrifice worked. Now all she has to do is wait. As the coastline of Troy comes into view, you glide down toward Paris, who is still somehow surprised that Helen's husband is a little bit upset. He paces the palace balcony with theatrical concern, wondering aloud if maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Behind him, Helen rolls her eyes so hard you're worried they'll get stuck. The Trojans prepare. Prince Hector, Paris's older brother, is the grown-up in the room. He straps on his armor without complaint, gathers the elders, and mutters things like avoidable conflict and we told you not to steal people's wives. He's tired already. So are you. You join a council meeting inside Troy's stone halls. The debate is stiff but polite. Should they send Helen back and avoid a war, or dig in and defend their honor? Paris insists on keeping Helen. No surprise there. The older men sigh and adjust their beards. Meanwhile, the Greeks land. There is no dramatic trumpet fanfare, just a lot of sand, shouting, and logistics. The beach is chaos. Odysseus is barking orders. Achilles is sparring shirtless, and Agamemnon is trying very hard to look like this is all part of a grand strategy rather than a long, expensive tantrum. The first battles are skirmishes, testing the waters, Literally and figuratively, you drift through the dust and clinging bronze, watching men with poetic names clash over causes they only half understand. Hera, true to form, nudges outcomes ever so gently. A sword slips here, a chariot wheel breaks there, just enough to favor the Greeks. Here's a historical nugget for you. Some believe the myth of the Trojan War preserves vague memories of a real conflict over trade routes near the Dardanelles. But in Hera's version, this is personal theater, staged with very expensive props. Back in the Greek camp, morale is low, the heat is relentless, supplies are erratic, and Achilles is in one of those moods again. You wander among the tents at night, listening to the murmurs of soldiers who expected glory and got bad wine and mosquitoes instead. Hera uses this time well. She visits other gods, nudging them like a bored neighbor with too much time and a very well-documented grudge. Athena is already in. Poseidon is sympathetic. Even Zeus is beginning to mutter that Paris has been quite arrogant lately. One fringe tidbit: there's a lesser-known myth in which Hera bribes Hypnos, the god of sleep, to knock Zeus out so she can meddle undisturbed. It doesn't go well. Zeus wakes up mid-prank and flings Hera into the sky. But let's pretend that doesn't happen. This version is bedtime appropriate. Meanwhile, you stroll beside Helen, who walks the palace gardens with the posture of someone bearing the weight of 1,000 ships. She talks less now, watches more. There's a quiet dignity to her that the songs always skip. You sit on a bench beside her as she arranges figs into symmetrical patterns, absent-mindedly humming a tune no one else remembers. Paris bursts in with another sonnet draft. She does not look up. Elsewhere, Hera is watching the tides of war. The Greeks are not doing badly, but not well enough for her taste. She wants humiliation, not just victory. She wants the Trojans to feel every ounce of the sting she felt when that apple didn't land in her hand. She starts with the little things. Muddied roads that delay reinforcements, a plague in the Greek camp, subtle but demoralizing, a momentary lapse in morale triggered by one too many bad omens. Historians still argue whether the divine intervention in myths was just a way of explaining random chance. But you know better. Hera doesn't cause things directly. She gently repositions the dominoes, and back at camp, the dominoes are beginning to wobble. Agamemnon offends Achilles. Achilles sulks, hard. You follow him as he storms back to his tent, his beautiful armor glittering in the dusk. He won't fight now, he says. Not until they beg. Agamemnon, for his part, refuses to beg. Hera watches from a quiet cloud, twirling a golden earring. She's pleased. Discontent among the Greeks means slower progress, more time for Troy to stew in its fate. And for her, that's the real goal, a slow-boiling victory. And so the war drags on. You walk through the campfires at night, listening to stories told by homesick warriors. Names and faces blur. Time stretches. It becomes clear this won't be a brief siege. This will be a marathon. And Hera, she's patient. Oh, so very patient. After all, she waited out Zeus's many indiscretions without flinching. A 10-year war is nothing to a goddess with a grudge and no bedtime. You're waking up now on the dusty plain between Troy and the Greek camp, the morning sun warming the tops of abandoned helmets. Nothing has moved. Not the front lines. Not the feelings. It's been weeks, months, years. Time gets slippery here. You rise slowly, stretch your limbs, and wander through this strange stillness that still manages to buzz with tension. The war isn't quite raging. It's simmering. You stop near Achilles' tent. He hasn't joined the battle in days. His armor sits gleaming in the corner, untouched, like a museum piece waiting for its hero. Achilles lounges nearby, legs draped over a stool, strumming a lyre and pretending not to care. You can tell he cares very much. Agamemnon, on the other hand, stomps through camp like a man rehearsing an apology he'll never actually deliver. Hera watches both with bemused detachment, lounging in the clouds and sipping something cold. Remember, it was Hera who set this up. Her whisper sparked Agamemnon's offense. Her silence helped Achilles stew. And now, the Greeks are floundering without their golden boy, and the Trojans are starting to believe they might actually win. Inside Troy's walls, life resumes its strange rhythm. Helen walks daily beneath the colonnades, trailed by murmurs and the ever-watchful glances of maids who say nothing but say everything. She knows what they think. She feels it in how her food is served, just a little colder now. She adjusts a fig in her fruit bowl, tilting it slightly to hide the bruised side. Paris, meanwhile, is thrilled. Every time a Greek attack falters, he claims it as a personal victory. You watch as he poses dramatically at battlements and recites speeches no one asked for. Hector tries to ignore him. The city's real defense rests on Hector's shoulders. And Hera's not finished. She moves next through dreams. You hover alongside her as she drifts invisibly through the slumbering minds of Greek commanders, planting vague anxieties and half-remembered prophecies. One wakes in a cold sweat, convinced his horse is cursed. Another starts washing his armor obsessively. A third won't touch his rations unless someone else tastes them first. It's sabotage by suggestion. Hera's specialty. One curious fact, in some versions of the myth, Hera appears to men in their dreams as someone they trust, a brother, a wife, even a dead parent. Creepy, a little, effective, absolutely. You watch one captain wake and immediately order his troops to dig a pointless trench just in case. Back on Olympus, the gods begin to bicker more openly. Aphrodite is annoyed that Paris still hasn't delivered much in the way of heroic poetry or decisive victories. Athena is sharpening her spear on everything she can find. Even Zeus is grumbling about being left out of the gossip. You find him sitting under a celestial olive tree, pretending he doesn't care who wins, but carefully watching the war unfold in a puddle that functions as a divine television. Hera visits him. Slowly, sweetly, she brings him wine. She compliments his toga, and then, with the same casual air as a woman asking about the weather, she suggests that maybe, just maybe, the Greeks deserve a little help. Zeus hesitates. He mumbles something about fate and balance. Hera smiles and leaves. The next day, the Greeks rally. Odysseus convinces Achilles' young companion, Patroclus, to wear Achilles' armor into battle. You're there, hidden behind a tent flap, as they hatch the plan, fool the Trojans, inspire the Greeks, and maybe, just maybe, shift the tide. And for a time, it works. You soar above the battlefield, watching Patroclus fight bravely, bronze shining, enemies scattering. The Greeks cheer, the Trojans falter. Hera leans forward in her cloudy seat. But then Hector arrives. In the chaos, Patroclus falls. The Greeks realize the truth. And Achilles howls. The sound tears through the camp like thunder. You feel it in your chest. It's grief, rage, and guilt wrapped in a scream that even the gods hear. Hera pauses, just for a moment. She hadn't planned this part, but she doesn't stop it either, because now, Achilles is back. He re-enters the war like a storm descending a mountain. You follow him into battle. There's a clarity to his fury. His movements are too perfect, too sharp. Hector falls, and with him, the hope of Troy wavers. Historians still argue whether this section of the myth reflects any real military history or is just epic poetry at its most operatic. But you're not reading a textbook. You're here, floating just behind Achilles as he drags Hector's body back to camp, dust rising behind the chariot wheels. Inside Troy, grief settles like ash. Helen closes her windows. Paris writes a poem no one will read. And Hera smiles, not out of joy, never that, but satisfaction. The scales tip ever so slightly in her favor, and that is enough. For now, you drift now through the smoky haze of the Greek campfires, the air thick with embers and whispers. Achilles sits alone, his armor streaked with blood and dust, the body of Hector still lying near the ships like a symbol too heavy to move. The war has turned. You can feel it in the way the soldiers speak, not with confidence, but with grim resignation. They know they are in the long middle stretch, where stories sag and heroes grow tired. But not Hera. Hera never sags, never tires, and certainly never forgets. She has what she wanted, Achilles back in the fight, Troy reeling from the loss of its golden sun, and Paris conveniently out of focus. Now she shifts strategies. You watch her, gliding above the battlefield like a silk scarf in a thunderstorm. Her target now is subtle influence. She doesn't need lightning bolts or monstrous beasts. She only needs the right people to think the right things at the right time. Which brings us to the most hero-like campaign of all, the spy game. No one expects gods to use information networks. But Hera, goddess of marriage, queen of Olympus, absolute expert in passive-aggressive sabotage, knows the power of a well-placed whisper. You join her as she inspires a few mortals to start listening better. Not eavesdropping, exactly, just paying attention. One Greek soldier, a nobody named Eurylochus, finds himself unusually good at gathering gossip. He knows who's hoarding rations. He hears which soldier saw Helen in the tower, weeping silently. He starts passing his insights upward, eventually earning himself a spot near Agamemnon's tent. Hera never speaks to him, not directly, but she makes sure his luck holds, his words land, and his superiors listen. The Trojans, too, feel the eyes. A servant girl begins noticing strange patterns in Paris's routines. How he leaves late at night, always with a lute, never with guards. One day, her observation reaches Hector's widow, Andromache, who begins urging caution and tighter patrols. You trail behind this web of watching and whispering, all carefully nudged by Hera's unseen hand. She's not seeking outright betrayal, just discomfort, suspicion, the kind of rot that starts at the edge and works inward. One fringe tidbit that rarely makes the myths: Hera had a sacred animal, the peacock, whose 1,000 eyes were said to have come from the Gen Argus. Now, those eyes appear in unexpected places, patterns in a tapestry, reflections in a goblet. You see one peacock feather, bright and iridescent, tucked into the helmet of a Greek scout. Coincidence? You think not. Inside Troy, tensions rise. The once unified defenders now squabble over strategy. Paris, ever the romantic liability, argues for more music, fewer spears. Priam, the aging king, longs only for peace but finds his voice drowned out by younger men with sharper swords. Helen, once passive, now watches carefully. She walks the palace halls with ears open, collecting stories like pearls. She begins writing letters. No one knows to whom. Perhaps to Menelaus, perhaps to herself, perhaps to the gods, who no longer reply. You float beside her one night as she kneels beside her bedroom window. Outside, the fires of the Greek camp flicker like stars. She whispers something you don't quite catch, but it sounds like why. Hera doesn't answer. She has other matters to manage, like ensuring that when Achilles dies, and he will, it happens in a way that continues the spiral. Not a noble death in glorious combat. No, something quieter, more humiliating. Historians still argue over Achilles' weakness. Was it really his heel? A metaphor, a later addition. But Hera, you sense, has a say in it all. She knows that the greatest fall not in battle, but in betrayal or carelessness. She begins planting the idea in Paris's dreams. A new weapon, a guided arrow, a shot not meant for chaos, but precision. Paris wakes one morning with a strange sense of purpose and starts visiting the archery fields again. You watch him string his bow with fingers that haven't seen calluses in years. Meanwhile, in the Greek camp, Achilles receives his fateful armor from Hephaestus, commissioned by his mother, Thetis, forged with love and prophecy and glitter. Yes, you notice it sparkles in the sun. Subtle, but it's there. Hera allows it. Let him gleam, she thinks. It'll be more poetic when he falls. And so, the next wave begins. Paris, on the battlements, raises his bow. The gods hold their breath. You don't. You already know what's coming. The arrow flies. It curves. Some say guided by Apollo. Some say by fate. Others say by Hera's gentle will. It strikes Achilles low. He stumbles. The Greeks gasp. You drift beside him as he falls, the dust rising around his glittering armor like fog. He is not angry, just surprised and tired. Achilles is gone. The Greeks mourn with rituals and war songs. The Trojans brace for retaliation. And Hera, she watches from above, unmoved. Her work here is not done, but the chessboard is tilting ever more in her favor. You lie back again on the dry grass of myth, the scent of olive oil and ash thick in the air, and let the next chapter come for you slowly. The sky above Troy turns the color of old parchment as you drift gently over the battlefield, quiet now save for the crackle of torches and the slow, groaning wheels of carts carrying the wounded. Achilles is gone, and the Greeks feel it deep in their sandals. You walk among them, past warriors sitting silently by their tents, sharpening weapons they no longer believe in. But Hera is not done, not even close. Her campaign moves into a new phase, psychological warfare, divine addition. She no longer needs bloodshed. She needs doubt. Doubt in the hearts of soldiers. Doubt in the halls of Troy. Doubt in the temples where prayers are whispered more out of habit than hope. Inside the Greek camp, Odysseus and Agamemnon argue about strategy. One wants cleverness, the other wants brute force. Hera listens, pleased that even the war's masterminds are beginning to second-guess each other. You float beside Odysseus as he mutters to himself about horses, tunnels, and what happens when trickery meets architecture. But tonight's focus lies elsewhere. You turn toward Troy. The city feels heavier now, less golden. The songs drifting from palace balconies are slower, the laughter more brittle. Even Helen's walk has changed. Less float, more drag. You find her in the garden again, slicing a pomegranate with the tip of a small, decorative dagger. Not in violence, just habit. Paris approaches her, dramatically as ever. He's wearing new robes stitched with tiny stars and asks her, for the fourth time that week, if she wants to hear his latest song. She does not. She says so, politely. Paris sulks, and Hera watches. Let's pause for one historical footnote. In the oldest versions of the myth, Helen may have been more prisoner than partner. Some sources suggest she never chose to go to Troy at all. Others paint her as willing but disillusioned. Historians still argue over whether her role was passive, political, or deliberately ambiguous, just the way a myth likes it. You see that ambiguity in her eyes tonight. She's not angry. She's not sad. She's just tired of being everyone's symbol, tired of apples, and ships, and men who mistake her silence for consent. That evening, a new tension settles over Troy. You walk through the palace halls, guided by the soft glow of oil lamps. The servants whisper that the gods are moving, that dreams have been strange lately, that owls cry more often at night. Then, something odd happens. Hera descends, not in fury, not in disguise, but in silence. You see her walking the marble halls of the palace like a shadow made of light, unseen by all but you. Her gaze drifts from room to room. She lingers near Paris's chamber door. She raises a hand, but does not knock. Instead, she turns and vanishes, leaving only the scent of jasmine and frost in the corridor. The next morning, Paris wakes from a dream he can't remember, soaked in sweat and mumbling something about broken strings. Helen is already gone, off to the temple, where she now spends more time than usual. Not praying, just sitting in the cool stone silence, enjoying the only place no one speaks her name. And Hera's gaze shifts. She moves to the Greek camp again, this time settling her sights on Agamemnon. You walk with him as he trudges to the shore, stepping over spears and broken sandals. He stares out at the horizon and sees nothing but endless water and his own reflection looking a little more hollow than it did yesterday. The war has dragged on for nearly a decade. Heroes have died, families forgotten, food supplies grow short. Men mutter that they miss goats more than glory, and still, no end in sight. But Hera knows it's almost time, not for peace, no, but for closure, for that final, deeply satisfying twist, the kind that makes you sigh and say, "Ah, there it is." And so she begins to whisper again. This time, the whispers are ideas, subtle ones, a wooden horse, a gift, a plan so outlandish, so theatrical, it has to be Greek. But that's a tale for later. Right now, you return to the soft flickering torchlight of Troy's palace, where Helen is rearranging a bowl of fruit for the third time that day. She picks up a perfect apple, smooth, red, innocent, and places it carefully at the center of the display. She stares at it, and smiles, barely. You watch as she turns away, her silk robe trailing like a fading melody. Behind her, the apple catches the firelight, just for a moment, and in the clouds above, Hera leans back on her throne, arms folded, eyes glowing softly. The long game is almost over. The dawn creeps slowly over the Greek camp, brushing the canvas tents with a pale, exhausted light. You hover quietly just above the waking soldiers, watching as they stretch sore limbs, shuffle to cook fires, and mutter about yet another day of not dying, not winning, and not going home. This is year 10. Yes, you heard that right. 10 years of siege, 10 years of shouting over walls, of skirmishes and truces and gods nudging things just out of reach. You'd think everyone would have given up by now, gone back to herding goats or composing moody epics. But no, pride is a sticky thing, especially when Hera's still feeding it. You drift toward the shore, where Odysseus sits cross-legged in the sand, arranging driftwood into patterns that might be diagrams or might just be therapy. Hera is watching him from above, not actively interfering, just waiting for the pieces to move themselves. Because Odysseus has ideas, the kind of ideas that make people roll their eyes, then go along anyway. Meanwhile, in Troy, the mood has shifted again. You trail behind Paris, who is, of course, composing another poem. But it's shorter now. Less flourish, more weight. Even he can feel it? The edges of fate curling inward. The smell of endings. Helen is no longer in the mood for poetry. You find her in the palace archives, leafing through scrolls about weather patterns, old treaties, and something about lunar eclipses. She doesn't say why. Maybe she's looking for a sign. Maybe she's just looking for something that isn't another conversation about apples. Hera, meanwhile, is restless. She's done everything but knock over the pieces herself. Now, it's time to tip the board, carefully, subtly. So she begins to encourage the gods to take sides again, not with fire and fury, but with gentle provocations, whispered arguments, and of course, the occasional scandal. Poseidon, always fond of walls and proud of not being included in their construction, leans further into the Greek camp. He offers them calmer waters, stronger tides, sturdier ships. Athena steps in too, her grudge with Aphrodite still quietly burning, and, well, Aphrodite has her hands full trying to make Paris look brave. One curious detail: some ancient versions claim the gods used proxies, mortal champions chosen like chess pieces, sent into battle with divine whispers guiding their blades. You see this now as Diomedes, one of the lesser-known Greek warriors, begins performing far above his pay grade. It's not him, not entirely. Hera is whispering again. You follow Diomedes into the thick of a chaotic morning raid, where he fights with surprising precision, dodging spears like he's seen the script. At one point, he even wounds Ares. Yes, the god of war himself. A minor wound, but enough to make Ares scream and retreat to Olympus like someone who stubbed their immortal toe. Hera is pleased. She doesn't like Ares, even though he's technically her son. He's a brute, always favoring Aphrodite and chaos over strategy and order. This little embarrassment, consider it maternal correction. The battle fades. Dust settles. Diomedes limps back to camp and immediately insists he saw gods on the battlefield. No one believes him. You do. Hera was there, tucked behind a shimmering veil of heat, smiling. Meanwhile, in Troy, Hector's widow, Andromache, visits the temple. She kneels beside Helen without speaking. The two women exchange a glance, tired, wry, understanding. No one asked them to be symbols, but they are. Every soldier's tale, every bard's verse, it all loops back to them. Back on Olympus, Zeus attempts to reassert himself. He declares neutrality, then promptly takes a nap so no one can question him. Classic. Hera uses the opportunity to host a very passive-aggressive brunch. You float through the godly gathering, where ambrosia is served cold and the tension is served colder. Athena complains about Paris. Poseidon grumbles about walls. Aphrodite fans herself and pretends not to care. But Hera directs the entire conversation like a hostess who already knows which guests will storm out. She says very little, just enough. Back below, the Greeks are gathering again. A new plan is forming. Odysseus has started carving something large from wood, something horse-shaped. Hera lets him believe it was his idea. Maybe it was, but she's the reason the Trojans will be tired enough, overconfident enough, bored enough to eventually fall for it. But not yet. Tonight, there's another skirmish, another flare of bronze and shouting. You hover over the dust, watching as both sides clash like waves that never recede. It's loud, chaotic, and then strangely silent as a sudden lull falls. In the center, two warriors stand still. One Greek, one Trojan. Neither moves, neither attacks. It's not a truce, just fatigue. A moment of shared exhaustion. You float between them, feeling Hera's presence recede slightly. Even she needs to pause. The stars come out. The gods go quiet. And in a corner of Troy, Helen finally tosses the apple out her window. It lands in a flower bed, and doesn't even bruise. Night in Troy is heavier now. You drift over its rooftops, where the wind doesn't blow quite as freely, and the moon's glow feels dimmer. Like it, too, is growing tired of the same endless script. The city breathes. Yes, but with the shallow rhythm of someone who suspects the worst is near. Inside the palace, the marble floor feels cooler underfoot than usual. You trail behind Helen as she walks slowly down the corridor, not in fear, not in sadness, just in a sort of deliberate quiet. She passes Paris without speaking. He looks up from tuning his lute, opens his mouth to say something, then thinks better of it. Hera is nearby, as always, not visible, not material, but present. You can sense her, in the coolness of the air, in the silence between words. She no longer needs to scheme. Everything is in motion, and motion is exactly what you find on the beaches outside the city, where the Greek camp stirs with something unusual: cooperation. Odysseus walks briskly between tents. Men are moving in odd, synchronized ways. Large wooden beams are being hauled from one side of camp to the other. Something is being built. You follow a group of sweaty, shirtless carpenters as they hammer together enormous curved boards. One looks up and mumbles, "It's a horse, right?" Another shrugs. "Maybe. Doesn't matter. We just need it hollow." Yes, the horse is happening. Odysseus is calling it a gift. Of course, a tribute, a final offering to the gods. "Let's just leave it here and pretend we gave up," he says. No one argues, partly because they're tired, partly because they've learned not to challenge a man who once tricked a cyclops using cheese and lies. Hera watches with quiet delight, not because it's clever, though it is, but because it's slow, long, embarrassingly theatrical, the sort of plan that only works if the enemy wants it to work. And in Troy, oh, they will. Inside the city walls, the mood has shifted again. The people are restless, not panicked. They've grown used to the rhythm of siege. Fight, rest, bury, repeat. But this sudden quiet from the Greek camp is unsettling. Scouts are sent. They return with news. The ships are gone. The camp is abandoned. All that remains is a single massive wooden horse, standing absurdly noble in the sand. You stand beside Priam as he squints at it from the battlements. He's old, tired, and, frankly, ready to believe anything that smells like an ending. Next to him, Paris beams. "See," he says, "they've finally realized they can't beat us." Priam isn't so sure. He calls for a council. Here comes one of Hera's finest moments, a man named Laocoon. A priest, a realist. You like him instantly. He doesn't trust the horse. "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," he says. You want to high-five him. But then, serpents. To massive sea serpents rise from the waters and crush Laocoon and his sons before anyone can blink. Now, some versions say it was Poseidon who sent the snakes. Others say it was Athena. Historians still argue whether this part of the story was meant as divine punishment or just a chilling bit of mythological stagecraft. But in this version, you suspect Hera made the call. Laocoon is gone. The Trojans, understandably spooked, decide the horse is sacred after all. A few hours later, they break down part of the wall, their own wall, to drag the thing inside. You watch it roll into the city like a parade float for a holiday no one understands. Drums, singing, even some wine. They dance in the streets. They crown Paris with laurel. Helen watches from the tower. She does not clap. The horse sits quietly in the square, looking oddly serene. You drift above it, peeking through the small hatch in its side. Inside, cramped and sweating, Greek warriors crouch in silence. Odysseus is elbowing Menelaus every time he fidgets. Diomedes is quietly mouthing prayers to Athena. One guy sneezes and gets a death glare from 3 others. And above it all, Hera, reclining in a cloud streaked with moonlight, watching the culmination of her most delicate piece of divine manipulation. She didn't raise a sword, didn't throw a bolt, just let mortals stumble into the chaos of their own pride, nudging them here and there, like a hostess gently steering guests toward arguments at dinner. Night deepens, Trojans sleep, and you lie beside the wooden horse, heart slowing, eyelids heavy, knowing what comes next. Not in the morning, not in daylight, but soon. It is the stillest hour of night, when even dreams grow quiet. You float above Troy, blanketed in a hush so thick it feels like the entire city is holding its breath. The stars above are crisp and careless. Below, lanterns flicker dimly in windows, casting gentle shadows onto the sleeping stone. And in the center of it all, the wooden horse sits patiently. You drift lower, circling it slowly. It looks almost proud in the moonlight, its head tilted just enough to seem wise, or smug. Around it, the celebration has faded into the soft wheezing snores of wine-drunk revelers. One man mumbles in his sleep about figs. Another clutches a half-eaten olive loaf. Troy is peaceful. For the last time. Inside the horse, the mood is anything but. You squeeze your way through the hatch, finding a dozen cramped Greeks coiled in awkward silence. Odysseus is in the back, eyes closed, whispering his plan like a bedtime story. Wait for the signal, he mouths. Then quiet. Then quick. Menelaus is closer to the front, staring through a narrow slit in the wood, watching Helen's tower for the flicker of a lantern, the agreed-upon sign. No one speaks. No one breathes too loudly. One warrior, jammed under a beam, mouths something about a pulled hamstring. He is ignored. Meanwhile, far above, Hera reclines on a wispy throne of mist, gazing down with cool satisfaction. Not gloating, just enjoying the quiet hum of inevitability. This is the end game, and as the minutes stretch long and strange, you shift back to the palace where Helen is still awake. She's sitting on the edge of her bed, fingers interlocked tightly. Her eyes flicker toward the window, then back down. A single lantern burns on the sill. Its flame sways faintly in the breeze. You wonder if she knows the full weight of what she's about to do. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't care anymore. You trail behind her as she rises, wraps herself in a thin shawl, and walks slowly toward the balcony. She picks up the lantern, hesitates for the barest moment, then places it in full view. Down below, inside the wooden horse, Menelaus exhales. The time has come, and so the hatch creaks open. The first Greek warrior to drop to the cobblestone winces, then grins. No guards, no dogs, just snoring and silence. One by one, they climb down, fanning out like silent shadows through the streets of the sleeping city. Odysseus leads them to the gates. You follow at his side, barely a whisper on the wind. He finds the locks. Quickly, quietly, a signal is lit. Out on the darkened shore, hidden behind a small outcrop of cliffs, the Greek ships have been waiting. They glide forward now. No sails, just oars, just purpose. You hover above it all as the city of Troy slumbers on, oblivious to the fact that the end is already walking its halls. When the gates open, it's not with a crash, but a sigh. A gentle groan of ancient wood and worn hinges. The Greek army pours in like water through a broken dam. The night erupts, but it's a soft eruption. At first, the first screams are quiet, cut short. The first fires are small, controlled. Hera watches with careful pride. She didn't throw a spear, didn't swing a sword. She simply guided one apple, years ago, onto the wrong banquet table. And now here it is, blooming. You drift through the palace gardens, past Helen's empty bench, past the shattered pomegranate she left behind, through the gates. Soldiers run. Through the streets, torches flash. Somewhere in the distance, A lyre plays one last trembling chord before silence takes it. The Trojans wake to confusion. You follow Priam stumbling from his bed, robe half-tied, voice hoarse. He calls for his guards. They do not answer. His hands tremble. His crown is crooked. The old man knows. Paris is slower. He arms himself clumsily, tries to rally men in the hallway, tries to find Helen, tries to believe he's still the hero in this story. He is not. In the temple, Andromache gathers her son and stares at the door, waiting for the knock. It doesn't come. The door doesn't knock. It splinters. And throughout it all, Hera does not blink. Her grudge, born from a fruit bowl, has reached its last act. Her rival, Aphrodite, is nowhere to be seen. Helen is too tired to run, Paris, too soft to win, and Troy, the city of high walls and high pride, is burning. You lift higher, above the flames now flickering along the rooftops. The smoke curls upward, catching in the folds of Hera's gown as she rises slowly into the sky, arms folded, gaze cool. There is no triumph in her smile, no glee, just quiet satisfaction. The mortals will write poems. They'll blame fate, or Helen, or the horse. But you and Hera, you both know, it was the apple. Dawn breaks over Troy, but the city no longer welcomes the light. Smoke coils from every quarter, thick and bitter, curling skyward like the final notes of a sad flute. You drift through the streets now strewn with broken pottery, toppled columns, and stunned silence. The Greeks are everywhere, not charging, not cheering, just moving with the eerie calm of a task long rehearsed. This is not a wild battle anymore. It is a conclusion. Hera hovers above, her eyes like polished marble. You can sense she's not pleased or angry, just complete. The deed is done. The fruit has ripened. The apple, years ago, was only the first pebble in the avalanche, and now there's nothing left to stop. You float through the ruins of Troy's marketplace. Stalls where dates and fish were once sold now lie in splinters. A copper coin rolls slowly down the cobbles and stops at your feet. No one picks it up. Priam, the king, falls in his palace courtyard, not to a soldier, but to Pyrrhus, Achilles' son, a boy raised on war, finishing what his father started. You're there, unseen, as Priam raises a hand in protest, not in defiance, but in memory of all that used to be, honor, order, decency. Hera turns away as he falls, not from pity, from disinterest. Paris, wounded, stumbles through a back alley, trailing blood and words like justice and love and Helen. He still thinks this is about him. You watch as he reaches a fig tree and collapses beneath it. Not a poetic death, not even particularly brave, just the quiet end of someone who mistook divine interest for invincibility. You expect Hera to gloat, maybe throw a one-liner his way, but she doesn't. Paris has become background noise to her now. Her real competition was never the pretty Trojan prince. It was Aphrodite, and she's still silent. You trail behind Helen, who is led, gently but firmly, through the palace by Menelaus. His eyes don't meet hers. His jaw is clenched so tightly it looks like it might shatter. The story says he was going to kill her, that he raised his sword and only lowered it when he saw her beauty again. But you saw her beauty long before he did. Faded, tired, dulled by 10 years of guilt and longing. There's no spell left. He doesn't kill her. He just walks beside her, and that's somehow worse. One scholarly debate you might enjoy here: was Helen ever truly blamed? Or was she used as a vessel, an excuse for masculine pride to twist into war? Ancient authors never agreed. Some painted her as a seductress, others as a victim, others still as a divine puppet tossed between goddesses playing board games with mortal lives. Tonight, you lean toward the puppet theory. The wooden horse burns in the square now, its hollow belly empty, its carved face slowly curling in the heat. A soldier tosses a torch onto the flank, and it catches fast, faster than you expect. It was never meant to last, just like Troy. And from the smoke, you rise, up, past the scorched rooftops, past the ruined walls and crumbled towers, past the cloud of ash that will drift into legend for generations. Up to Hera. She sits calmly, arms folded in a gown the color of the storm's eye. Around her, the other gods hover, watching, arguing softly, casting glances. Athena looks smug. Poseidon mutters about the destruction of beauty. Apollo is nowhere to be seen. And Aphrodite, you finally see her. She's not weeping. She's not furious. She's just standing there, barefoot on a sliver of cloud, watching the city fall with the quiet ache of someone who knows she lost. Not the war, not the city, but the point. Helen is no longer admired. Paris is dead. Troy is rubble. And beauty, it seems, was never enough. Hera walks past her without a word. You trail behind, catching the faint scent of myrrh and smoke. Hera doesn't glance back, doesn't gloat, doesn't whisper a single "told you so." She doesn't need to. The apple was delivered, the message received, the judgment made, if not by Paris, then by time. You settle on the edge of Olympus, legs dangling in the mist, and watch the last flames flicker out in the valley below. Troy is gone, the war is over, but its story, its song, is only beginning. Poets will blame Helen, warriors will praise Achilles, philosophers will sigh about fate. But you'll remember a wedding, a golden apple, a quiet, regal goddess who didn't shout or fight, but simply waited. And when the time came, she turned the world. The fires of Troy still smolder, but already the smoke is thinning. You float through the remnants of the city, now little more than ash and story. Dust settles where legends once walked. A piece of shattered amphor rolls across the marble floor of the once magnificent palace, and no one is left to catch it. You descend beside the scorched outer wall. What's left of it? A once proud defense, built to withstand sieges, now stands cracked and crumbling, stones blackened by flame, blood stains crested at the base, and in the center of it all, the ghost of a city. But Hera is not here anymore. She's done what she came to do. You find her not above the battlefield, but further inland, gliding lazily over the Aegean like a breeze scented with olives and old triumph. Her gaze is distant, her posture relaxed. There is no ceremony to her victory. It was never about applause. It was about correction. You join her high above the sea where the Greek fleet is now preparing to sail. The war is over. The victors are restless. You can feel it in the way they pack, the way they glance over their shoulders. There is no triumph in their retreat, just survival. A long, tired exhale after a decade spent under siege, both literal and emotional. You drift beside Menelaus, who walks the shoreline with Helen in tow. Neither says much. She wears a plain robe now. No gold, no crown, just fabric, hair pinned loosely, sandals caked in ash. You watch as she picks up a small shell, runs her thumb over it, and lets it fall. Menelaus looks at her, not with rage, not even with love, just with the haunted acceptance of someone carrying too many memories home. They board the ship together, and Hera, she does not watch. Her attention is now elsewhere, on the small tremors already building in the Greek world. The war may be done, but its consequences are only beginning. Odysseus, for instance, will not have an easy journey. You float alongside his ship, already turning toward storms and islands and monsters that wait with ancient patience. The gods still argue about how long he'll take. 10 years, 20. No one knows. Hera does not interfere. Odysseus is not hers to shape. She has no fondness for tricksters. But Agamemnon, that's a different story. You follow him home to Mycenae, where he returns to a wife with knives in her heart and vengeance in her hands. Clytemnestra has not forgotten Iphigenia, nor has Hera. In fact, you suspect she may have reminded her. Quietly, in a dream, with a whisper, you watch from a garden wall as Agamemnon enters the palace. The sun sets, and the doors close. Loudly, some myths say he was stabbed in the bath. Others say poisoned at dinner. Historians argue which version is older, but all agree he never saw it coming. And Hera, she allows herself one raised eyebrow of satisfaction. You wander through the remains of the Greek world, shaken, scattered. The cost of victory is never listed on the scrolls, but you feel it in every burned village, every broken marriage, every child who asks where his father went. Hera moves silently among the wreckage, not cruelly, but with the steady hands of someone restoring balance. To her, the war was never about heroes. It was about symmetry. One goddess won an apple. One city lost its crown. Now, the world can breathe again. But not all gods are ready to rest. You stumble into a heated debate on Olympus. Ares blames Athena. Athena blames Aphrodite. Aphrodite blames everyone. Even Hermes looks annoyed. Dionysus is just drinking. Again. And Hera. Hera sits quietly through it all. When Zeus finally roars for silence, she does not flinch. She simply stands, straightens her robe, and says, "It's done." No one dares argue, because they all know this was her play, her game, her lesson. The mortals will rebuild. They always do. Temples will be raised again. Poets will shape the stories into what suits them best. But Hera's version, the quiet, waiting kind, will echo under their verses like a second heartbeat. You return now to Troy's ruins one last time, just before the rain. Yes, rain, not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that darkens the ashes and cools the stones. A cleansing, perhaps, or just coincidence. You never know with gods. A lone Trojan woman walks through the remains. She doesn't cry. She collects a broken comb from the mud, tucks it into her shawl, and moves on. She live. Others will too. And Hera. She watches the rain begin. She closes her eyes and lets the silence stretch long into morning. You find yourself drifting through the gentle drizzle that falls over the Aegean, its rhythm steady, hypnotic, a lullaby for broken kingdoms. Troy is behind you now, barely more than a smear of smoke on the horizon. The Greek ships glide forward, creaking softly like tired bones, sails heavy with damp and silence. No one is singing. You land quietly on the deck of Menelaus's ship. He stands at the bow, arms folded, cloak pulled tight against the mist. Helen stands a few steps behind him, not touching the rail, not looking out at the sea. She just exists there, as if she were being carried like cargo, not returning like a queen. The crew avoids her. Superstition, perhaps, or memory. You sit beside her for a while, letting the sea spray coat your face. She closes her eyes and breathes in the salt air. It smells like freedom and failure. Above, Hera floats quietly. She's watching? Yes, but not with the sharp precision of before. Now she's simply observing. The pieces have moved. The dust has settled. She's in her final sweep. Like someone walking through an empty theater after the performance, noting which chairs are broken and which props still lie askew. But as always, she's not finished, because the Greeks, for all their pride and triumph, have forgotten something critical. The gods remember everything, and Hera especially remembers those who slighted her. The voyage home is no victory parade. You trail behind each ship as the sea grows choppier, the winds more erratic. Some say it's Poseidon, others say it's fate, but you catch a glimpse of Hera's hand brushing lightly across the waves, her expression serene. One ship runs aground near Euboea, another splinters in a sudden storm, a third disappears into fog and is never heard from again. You'd think 10 years of war would earn safe passage, but Hera never promised fairness, only order. You follow Odysseus's ship next. He seems suspicious, always looking over his shoulder, checking the horizon for unnatural clouds. You hear him mutter prayers to Athena and leave offerings in clever little shrines nailed to the mast. Hera smirks. She doesn't hate him, but she doesn't protect him either. He's clever enough to survive, if barely. Back on Olympus, the mood has shifted again. The halls are quieter, the banquets less frequent. Even Dionysus drinks with less enthusiasm. War has changed them, too. Not deeply, but noticeably. Athena has returned to her scrolls. Ares paces, twitchy and bored. Aphrodite keeps her distance. You find her one afternoon sitting beneath a pomegranate tree in the garden of Olympus, absent-mindedly threading rose petals into a chain. Her face is unreadable. She does not speak to you. She doesn't need to. Hera appears shortly after, gliding along the marble path as if she owns the breeze. She doesn't sit. She simply stands near Aphrodite, arms crossed, the wind barely tugging at her sleeves. For a long while, neither of them says a word. Then Aphrodite lifts her gaze and offers a single sentence. You still didn't win. Hera smiles. Didn't I? And then she leaves. You follow her into the great hall, now echoing with the hollow footfalls of a goddess who no longer has anything to prove. She moves past the throne of Zeus, who is, predictably, napping, past the hearth of Hestia, past the ever-empty seat where Hades refuses to visit. She walks to the window, gazes down upon the earth, and she breathes. You descend once more to the human world. In Mycenae, the streets whisper about Agamemnon's homecoming, and the terrible silence that followed. No trumpet sounded, no cheer was raised. He entered the gates and vanished, and the queen lit no fires of welcome. You float through the corridors of his palace, past tapestries depicting old victories now frayed at the edges, past the bathhouse where the steam never quite lifts. You don't linger there. Hera has made her point. Meanwhile, Helen walks quietly through her own palace again. You watch as she resumes old routines with the steady grace of someone who knows she will never be entirely forgiven or forgotten. She greets her servants with a nod. She brushes her hair without looking in the mirror. She arranges fruit carefully, thoughtfully, always placing the apple at the center. You wonder if it's deliberate. And far, far away, the ruins of Troy cool under vines and silence. The walls that once held back the world are now playgrounds for birds and ghosts. A shepherd boy finds a piece of bronze buried in the soil and shows it to his father. It's from the gods, the man says, not entirely joking. Hera, from her place in the clouds, hears none of this. Or maybe she hears it all. But for now, she rests. The war is over. The consequences are unfolding, and the memory of one fruit, tossed onto one banquet table by one goddess left off a guest list, continues to echo in every love poem, every ruined wall, every bedtime story that begins with, long ago, in the city of Troy. You now drift through time, not just space. Seasons fold into one another like silk. Spring rains become summer dust. Autumn winds carry whispers that used to be names. Troy is a story now, a lesson, a warning passed down between firelight and fig trees. But for Hera, it's simply a completed task. She moves differently now, slower, not because she's weary, but because the need for speed has passed. The fruit was picked, the war was waged, and the world has tilted into its next age. You find her sitting beneath an olive tree high on the slopes of Olympus, watching the mortal world uncoil. She holds no scepter, no thunder crackles above her head. Just the occasional glimmer of thought moving across her expression like clouds sliding over the sun. Far below, the bards begin to sing. They don't mention Hera much. Not directly. She isn't the sort of goddess who demands the spotlight. That was Aphrodite's style. That was Athena's. Hera prefers the space between lines, the inference, the ripple, the cool breeze that makes the torch sputter. Still, she listens. You follow the songs from village to village, from lyres to ink. Each retelling shifts. In one, Helen is a victim. In another, a temptress. In some, Troy falls for love. In others, for arrogance. Hera smiles faintly. She knows the truth lives in the contradiction. A new temple is raised in her honor. Small, nestled between vineyards. You step into it one afternoon and breathe in the scent of beeswax and crushed rosemary. The priestess is young. Her prayers are soft. She speaks not of war, but of marriages, of harmony, of quiet justice. You know Hera hears her, because outside the temple, a fig tree blossoms in winter. And yet, the gods are restless. Not all of them have Hera's patience. Ares sulks near battlefields, hoping for the next spark. Artemis prowls forests that grow quieter with every passing century. Hermes delivers messages no one asked for, just to feel useful. Even Aphrodite is stirring again. You catch glimpses of her reflection in mirrors, in the surface of fountains, in the sidelong glance of lovers who don't yet know what they're starting. She's not defeated, just paused, and Hera knows. That's why she starts laying the groundwork for what comes next. It starts with marriages, mortal ones. You see her influencing them in small, subtle ways. A moment of hesitation before an I do. A breeze that carries a doubt. A sudden reunion at a market that wasn't planned but changes everything. She's not causing drama, not really, just curating. She's always curated. Remember, Hera is the goddess of marriage. Not love, not lust, marriage, the long road, the hard parts, the politics of partnership. And so she watches. In Sparta, Helen walks through her halls again. She greets visiting nobles with grace, but never warmth. She listens to poems with her eyes on the ceiling. She is no longer the face that launched 1,000 ships. She is a woman who survived them. You follow her to the garden one morning. She prunes vines with careful hands. The fruit bowl on the table beside her contains only pears and grapes now. No apples. She knows. Across the sea, Odysseus is still lost, his ship battered, his beard longer with every missed island. The gods play dice with his fate, but Hera abstains. He's not part of her story anymore. She's watching other things. A young girl in Corinth who dreams of being a queen. A fisherman in Crete who keeps seeing the same woman in his dreams. A prince in Argos who will one day be cursed by loyalty. Hera watches them all, not to punish, not to test, to shape, because the next myths, yes, there will be more, will need balance. And Hera, above all else, believes in balance, even if it comes from imbalance first. You sit with her one evening on the lip of a cloud, legs dangling into the violet sky. Below, mortals light lamps against the dusk. Somewhere, a mother tells her child the story of Troy, not the whole story, just the version with horses and heroes. They leave Hera out, but the child dreams of her anyway, and in that dream, a golden apple rolls slowly across the floor, coming to a stop at the girl's feet. She picks it up and smiles. Now the world turns gently under a quieter sky. You drift through fields of grain swaying in the warm breath of early summer. The war long faded into dust and myth. Life resumes, not triumphantly, but cautiously, as if the soil itself remembers the sound of marching feet and still tenses at thunder. But Hera remembers everything, and forgets nothing. You find her today in a temple, not her grand shrine atop Olympus, but a modest one in the hills of Boeotia. It smells of warm clay and crushed laurel. The priestess sweeping the steps hums an old tune that no one else remembers the words to. Inside, a small statue of Hera sits beside bundles of lavender and a tiny clay cup of honey. No gold, no fire, just faith. Hera does not need grandeur. She exists in the soft rituals, the tying of a bride's hair ribbon, the silent promise exchanged between hands at a wedding altar. The moment a woman closes the door behind her and decides to stay or go, you follow her as she drifts from that temple into the wind, passing over villages that no longer speak her name, but that still live by her laws. Loyalty, dignity, memory. The mortals speak now of other stories, new ones. Jason and the Argonauts, Theseus and the Minotaur. Achilles, even after death, still makes the rounds in song. But Hera does not mind being forgotten, because forgetting isn't real. Not when she is the reason behind so much that endures. You trace her steps to Argos, her favored city, where festivals still bear her name even if few remember why. Girls dress in white, twine wildflowers into garlands, and dance barefoot under the olive trees. There is laughter. Hera allows it. After all, she is not the goddess of grief. She is the goddess of bonds. But bonds require balance, and Hera is still watching. You drift now to Ithaca, where Odysseus, not yet home, is enduring a different kind of punishment, loneliness wrapped in cleverness. His brilliance, once celebrated, now feels like a mirror turned often inward. Each island, each test, each false shore becomes more absurd, more exhausting. And Hera, she watches without intervention, not because she's cruel, but because she didn't start his journey, and she won't end it. She simply notes that a man who once tricked gods now struggles to trust even his own shadow. You float over Mycenae again, where Clytemnestra sits on a throne that trembles beneath her. Her reign is stained with blood? Yes, but also with something more difficult, the burden of being right and wrong at the same time. Did Agamemnon deserve what he got? Perhaps. Did she deserve what followed? Also perhaps. Hera doesn't interfere. She just listens. Far across the sea, Helen, too, listens. To silence, to birdsong, to the scraping of a fruit knife across a plate. You find her one morning walking the cliffs above the water, barefoot, robe fluttering behind her like a banner of surrender or peace. No one can tell which. She pauses by a rock that looks oddly like a throne, sits, closes her eyes, and lets the wind pull strands of hair across her face. A group of travelers passes nearby. One whispers, "Is that her?" Another shrugs. "She'd be older now, wouldn't she?" They move on. Helen doesn't open her eyes, and still Hera watches. Not obsessively, not possessively, just with the detached grace of someone who once tilted an entire world to make a point, and now waits to see who remembers it. The fruit bowl sits on Helen's table again. Apples, this time. 3 of them. Red, shiny, perfect. She doesn't eat them. You rise now toward Olympus again, toward those marble halls carved from clouds and memory. The gods are quieter now. Even Ares only spars with shadows. Athena has buried herself in books. Hermes hums to himself as he strolls, with no messages to deliver. Zeus, ever indulgent, naps with his head on a thundercloud. And Hera walks alone, not lonely, alone. She passes the gallery of past deeds, the great murals of wars and heroes and tragedies, and at the very end of the hall, beneath a panel of gold-leaf stars, is a single apple. Real, no, but perfect in its symbolism. You sit with her there for a while. No words, no movement, just the echo of centuries folding themselves into a soft hush. And as you finally close your eyes, the last thing you hear is not a battle cry or a trumpet's call, but the subtle sound of balance being restored. You return now to the quiet edge of the world, the kind of quiet that exists only after storms have passed and storytellers have moved on. The sea is gentle again, brushing at the rocks like it's apologizing for all the shouting. The sky is open, pale, and wide. Everything breathes slower now, even the gods. But Hera is not idle. She never is. You find her walking through a dream, not her own, but someone else's. A young bride-to-be in Thessaly lies asleep beneath a new wool blanket, fretting about her wedding feast. Hera moves softly through her thoughts, adjusting a thread here, brushing away a doubt there. No grand declarations, just reassurance. The marriage will hold. The bread won't burn. The olive oil will arrive in time. She doesn't ask for thanks. She doesn't need shrines to know she's still working, because for Hera, power has never meant noise. You follow her into another dream, this one darker. A Spartan noble woman weeps behind a closed door, her betrothal arranged without consent. Hera doesn't change the outcome, but she does leave a thought in the woman's mind that will grow into resolve, into resistance, into something stronger than obedience. It's easy to forget Hera's domain when war stories dominate the scrolls. But when the songs fade, and the dust settles, it's her realm that resumes. Structure, vows, the world glued back together with ceremony and quiet endurance. Back on Olympus, the other gods are restless again, not in the way they were during the Trojan War, but with a kind of divine boredom. Dionysus has thrown the same party 3 nights in a row. Hermes is racing himself around the clouds. Even Artemis sighs occasionally, but Hera has found something new to occupy her gaze. You float beside her as she surveys a small village where a husband and wife argue every morning over bread rations. They love each other, they just don't know it anymore. Hera doesn't interfere directly, but the next day, the wife remembers a joke from their first year. She tells it at breakfast. He laughs. Just once. You move on. You pass over Corinth, where a woman lights a candle for a daughter long since married off. You pass over Delos, where a man prays to Hera for a child, though his neighbors say she doesn't answer those kinds of prayers. But she does. Sometimes, when it suits the balance. A curious side note, one scholars often debate Hera's role in childbirth. Though better known for her fierce protection of marriage, she's also linked to birth, to beginnings, but not the kind Aphrodite brings. Hera's births are planned, structured, followed through. She's the breath after the cry. You return with her now to Argos, where her oldest temple still stands. Not in grandeur, but in presence. Vines have begun to reclaim the stone. Bees hum lazily through the columns. But the altar remains clean. Someone still tends it. A woman in her 60s kneels there each week, lays down figs, and prays, not for riches, not for romance, but for her son's wife to find peace in their home. Hera listens. Every time, you drift beside the woman as she leaves, her sandals clicking softly on the worn flagstones. Hera watches her go, then touches the altar lightly with her fingers. A fig ripens on the branch outside. Back in the mortal world, bards still tell the tale of Troy. They speak of Paris, of Helen, of that horse with the smug grin. They laugh about the chaos of the gods and shrug about the fate of men. Hera's name gets mentioned here and there, often with a sigh, sometimes with a grimace, never with understanding, but she doesn't mind, because, as the poets stumble toward their metaphors, Hera's real work continues, not in fire and ruin, but in the steady beat of routine, in the daily decisions that form the spine of civilizations. You follow her into a house where two brothers haven't spoken in months. Tonight, one of them knocks on the other's door. Hera says nothing. She just lets the silence last long enough for the words to rise. You sit beside her on a temple roof as the stars blink slowly into view, and for the first time in a long while, you see her smile. Not the cool, knowing smirk of victory, but something smaller, gentler, contentment. Not because she's been praised, but because the world, though wounded, is still turning, and she had a hand in that. The stars fade one by one, blinking out as dawn washes over the hills of the Peloponnese. You drift down through the early mist, the kind that clings to laurel leaves and temple steps, softening even the sharpest marble. Beneath you, a rooster calls to early, and a shepherd grumbles as he rolls out of his blanket. The world is waking, and Hera is watching, not in a looming, thundery way, but like someone scanning the horizon before the market opens. You find her not on Olympus this time, but walking the earth in a quiet form. A woman in a gray-blue peplus, her hair pinned up in a style to centuries out of date. No one notices her, but people move around her instinctively. Children shift to let her pass. Dogs grow calm, old men stop arguing. She's not announcing herself. Hera never does, but balance hums around her like a second skin. You trail her into a village square where a trial is about to begin. A young wife has accused her husband of breaking his vows, not with another woman, but with laziness, neglect, dishonor. She stands calmly before the elders while the husband sweats beside her, more embarrassed than angry. Hera sits quietly among the crowd, invisible, but very much present. The verdict will be fair. She doesn't tip the scales. She just ensures they're clean. When it ends, an agreement, not a punishment. The woman nods once. The husband bows deeper than expected. Hera rises and continues walking. Another piece nudged into place. Elsewhere, further north, a noble woman drafts a new law protecting widows' inheritance rights. She doesn't pray as she writes. She doesn't whisper Hera's name, but she burns a sprig of rosemary and writes the first line with her right hand curled into a wedding ring she never took off. Hera approves. You move now to Thebes, where a statue of Hera has stood untouched since the war. Not defaced, not honored, just there, covered in ivy, birds nesting in the folds of her stone gown. A boy cleans it once a month, not out of faith, but because his grandmother says it's respectful. Hera knows. She always notices grandmothers. One scholarly curiosity that lingers. In older rites, Hera was worshipped not just as queen, but as girl, bride, mother, a trinity. Some say it reflected the seasons of womanhood. Others say it was to remind mortals she understood all stages of devotion. She still does. You follow her now into a coastal town where a ship has returned with more crew than expected. Two strangers came aboard mid-journey, claiming shipwreck, claiming God sent them. The crew let them stay. When they dock, the strangers vanish into the crowd, but not before blessing the captain's sick daughter with a touch of the hand. Was it Hera? Maybe. Or be one of her attendants. Or maybe be just a story people will whisper to explain the miracle. Hera doesn't care which they believe. She only cares that the girl wakes without fever. Back in Olympus, the halls echo with a slow kind of silence, not absence, just pause. Athena is sharpening scrolls into arguments. Apollo is composing lullabies for cities not yet built. Even Ares has taken to wandering mountain trails in search of clarity. You find Hera sitting alone near the reflecting pool at the edge of the heavens. The water is still. Beneath its surface, flickering visions, not memories, not prophecy, but echoes of choices made. She watches a boy hesitate before breaking a promise. She watches a queen reread her wedding vows after 10 years of silence. She watches two farmers argue over boundary stones, then sit and share bread anyway. The world does not thank her for these things. That's not why she does them. You sit beside her, close enough to feel the cool weight of her presence. She speaks softly, only once. Balance isn't peace, she says. It's the silence between storms. And then she returns to watching. Below, in a quiet village, a mother tucks her children into bed and lights a small lamp. She whispers a prayer, not to Hera, not by name, just to the idea of strength, of keeping a promise, of things holding together. That's enough. You rise again into the clouds, through the quiet stretch of sky between dusk and full night. Hera doesn't follow. She doesn't need to. She's already there, in the home, in the vow, in the soft hum of a world still trying. Not perfect, but still trying. The world is older now, not in years, but in the way stone smooths under footsteps and songs change in the mouths of grandchildren. You glide through the folds of morning mist, past vineyards heavy with dew, where the only gods spoken of are the ones that help the grapes grow sweet. And yet, Hera lingers. You find her in a marketplace just waking. A fig vendor sets out her wares, carefully, as if arranging offerings. A butcher mutters blessings under his breath, not sure who they're for. The priest of another temple passes by, nodding politely to an empty patch of air. She's there, quiet, not haunting, just remaining. You walk beside her as she weaves through the stalls, unseen but very much in control. She pauses beside a woman inspecting fabrics, one bolt for the wedding robe, one for the child's cradle. Two lives tied together in one thread. Hera runs a finger over the linen. The dye holds truer than it should. No one notices, except the seamstress. She smiles and doesn't know why. You drift onward toward a city preparing for a festival. Not Hera's. Officially, this one is for Demeter. But Hera doesn't mind. The altars may change, the names may shift, but the rituals remain. People still kneel, still hope, still promise things they cannot always keep. In a side street, you pass a couple arguing. Nothing serious, just frayed nerves and mismatched intentions. Hera listens. She doesn't interfere, but the next morning, the husband apologizes first, and the wife remembers to laugh. These are the kinds of victories no poet writes down. Back on Olympus, things are slow. Zeus snores through the noon sun. Apollo tunes an instrument that hasn't existed in the mortal world for centuries. Athena, ever tireless, debates herself for sport. The great dramas are gone, but Hera doesn't miss them. She doesn't need fire to feel powerful. She has pattern, and patterns are everywhere. Take the woman in Corinth, who's been asked to marry a man she's never met. She's afraid. Hera comes to her in a dream, not with thunder, not with threats, but with a door. Just a door, closed, then open, and a breeze that carries rosemary and ink. The woman wakes. She doesn't cancel the wedding, but she asks for a meeting first, a conversation, and when they talk, it goes better than expected. Hera smiles. You float onward, higher now, toward a mountaintop where a shepherd carves small symbols into rock for luck. He doesn't know the names of the old gods, but he carves them anyway. Hera watches, then sends a warm breeze to shift the sheep gently back toward home. Historians will one day puzzle over these fragments. Was this Hera's mark? Was that a temple or just a grain store? The records are unclear. The stones tell only part of the truth. But the stories remember. Even now, bards still sing in flickering taverns. They shorten the myths, clean them up, turn gods into metaphors, battles into metaphysical quandaries. Hera is often portrayed as vengeful, distant, hard. You know better. You've seen her linger by the hearth. You've watched her nudge the scales of justice with one breath. You've heard the sigh she let out when Troy burned. Not triumph, not sorrow, just release. Tonight, You follow her into a forest clearing where no temple stands, no offering burns, just silence, just space. She kneels, not to pray, but to feel the moss beneath her hands. She traces a spiral in the earth, not a symbol, just motion. It starts to rain, not heavy, just enough to soften the air, to patter against the leaves, to remind the world it's alive. Hera doesn't move. You sit beside her and feel the quiet stretch wide, like a lake without wind. A fox passes nearby, pauses, then continues. Hera nods to it, as if sharing a secret. You look up at the sky, moonless, for once. No stars, just the kind of dark that feels gentle rather than empty. And Hera, she breathes in the damp, and for a moment, she looks almost young. Not girl young, eternal young, because balance doesn't age. It only waits, and the world, as always, keeps offering her moments to keep it steady. The night deepens like a warm blanket, folding over hills and olive groves, softening every edge. You hover in the hush, no longer just watching Hera, but sensing her in the air itself, woven into the fabric of everything that holds together quietly. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You drift to a small village near the sea, where the shutters creak in the wind and a cat paces the rooftop like it owns the town. Inside one of the stone homes, a woman sits by the hearth, staring into the embers. Her husband is late returning from the docks. Again, she's not angry, just tired. She turns her wedding ring slowly on her finger, over and over, not thinking, just remembering. Hera is near, not as a vision, not even in a dream this time, just a feeling, the weight of commitment, the memory of a promise, a small voice that says, wait, then speak, not forgive, not forget, just wait. And when the man returns, smelling of fish and wine and vague excuses, he doesn't meet her eyes at first, but he does sit beside her, and eventually, he does speak, properly, about fear, about struggle, about shame, and she listens. You drift out through the chimney smoke, high above, where the stars have returned. One winks at you like it knows something you don't, probably does. Far across the world, in Athens, a philosopher scribbles down a theory of justice and balance. It's imperfect, too tidy, too abstract, but Hera watches anyway. Humans always try to name the things they feel, but can't explain. She doesn't correct them. You glide with her into a courtroom in Rhodes where two neighbors argue over a vineyard boundary. The judge listens, hands folded, trying to be fair. Hera shifts the light in the room, just so, until a shadow points to an overlooked parchment. Balance restored. No thunder, just truth. You follow her next into the dream of a young woman on the verge of saying yes to a man who means well, but listens poorly. Hera does not say don't marry him. That's not her place. She shows the woman a dream of herself, 10 years from now, silent at a table, not unhappy, not bruised, just erased. The woman wakes. She thinks. She doesn't run, but she delays, and Hera leaves her to choose. Scholars often miss this side of Hera. They fixate on the jealousy, the fury, the punishment. They ignore the pauses, the restraint, the fact that for every myth of wrath, there are 100 stories that went unnoticed simply because nothing went wrong. You now float to the farthest edge of the Peloponnese, where an old shepherd prepares to bury his wife. They were married 50 years. He doesn't cry, not because he's stoic, but because her memory is so large, so present, it hasn't left room for tears yet. He sets a laurel sprig beside her stone, not for Aphrodite, not for Hades, for Hera. Quiet thanks for a life that, while imperfect, held. You drift now above a valley where new farmers plant old seeds. A village rebuilt after fire. A child named after a great-grandmother. Patterns. Hera's domain. And finally, you return with her to Olympus. The great hall is dark, quiet, vast. The other gods sleep. Or pretend to. Ares snores in his armor. Apollo hums softly in his sleep. Athena twitches like she's still arguing in dreams. Zeus mutters the name of an old nymph. Only Hera stands awake. You watch as she lights a small lamp at the center of the hall. No ceremony, no pronouncement, just the steady flame of continuity. Then she walks the length of the room and straightens a fallen goblet someone left behind. Balance. You sit at the edge of the reflecting pool with her again. The water ripples softly, showing lives that are not famous, not sung, but deeply sacred. A mother breaking up a fight between sons. A husband who finally hears his wife's silence. A young man leaving a ceremony alone, but proud, all held together by invisible threads. Hera touches the surface of the water, not to change it, just to remind herself it's still moving. You lie back beside her now, clouds below you like pillows, stars above like lullabies, and feel the breath of the world slowing, not stopping, just resting. And Hera, she finally closes her eyes. For a while, the wind carries you east, across calm waters where the sun lifts itself gently into the morning sky like a lantern hung by quiet hands. The Aegean is glass today, unmoving except for the occasional shimmer of fish just below the surface. You drift low enough to hear the waves breathe. Hera is already there. She stands, barefoot on the sea, as if the laws of gravity understand that hers is the weight of judgment, not matter. Her robe stirs with the breeze, but nothing disturbs her expression. Still, watchful, unmoved by the passage of time, but attentive to its shape, you follow her inland to a hillside village still brushing sleep from its rooftops. A man sharpens tools. A girl carries eggs in a basket. A mother kisses her son's forehead and tucks a prayer into his pocket, just in case. Hera passes through it all, unnoticed but necessary, like mortar between stones. You find her watching a priestess in training fumble through her morning rituals, ashes spilled, the incense sticklet at the wrong end. The girl stammers apologies to the air. Hera simply leans in and nudges the flame with a breath so soft it almost isn't there. The incense catches. The room fills with scent. The girl smiles, though she doesn't know why. Further down the coast, a captain prepares to sail, unaware that today the sea intends to test him. Hera doesn't warn him. She just gives him the idea to double-check the rigging. He does. The sail holds. These are her interventions now. Small, perfect. You drift with her to a city square where a philosopher speaks loudly about the fickleness of the gods. Hera listens without expression as he waves his arms and calls down thunder that never arrives. When he finishes, people applaud politely, then go home to pray for their marriages to hold. Hera understands the difference between noise and faith. Historians rarely write about this chapter in the gods' lives. There's no war, no spectacle, just continuation, yet it's here, in this stretch of undramatic days, that Hera is at her most complete. Because drama is fleeting, but structure, that endures. You return now to a grove of ancient oaks. Deep in the forest, a wedding is taking place. Not royal, not noble, just a people who have chosen to walk forward together, despite everything. Hera stands quietly among the trees, invisible, watching as the couple exchanges garlands. She brushes a breeze through the leaves, not enough to disrupt the vows, just enough to cool the groom's sweating brow. When the bride stumbles over her words, Hera stills the world just long enough for her to try again. She gets it right. Everyone smiles. Later, as guests dance barefoot in the grass, Hera walks among them like the rhythm itself, felt, not seen. A child offers her a crumb of honey cake, not knowing why. She accepts. Of course she does. You rise with her into the golden haze of evening. Far below, the earth continues turning in its gentle, lopsided way. Homes are lit from within. Dinner tables fill. Arguments soften. Promises are made. Not all of them will hold, but enough will. And that's the secret Hera keeps. You hover beside her above a coastal cliff where two old women sit in silence, watching the tide. They haven't spoken in an hour, but their hands are touching. That's all Hera needs to see. She presses a kiss into the wind and lets it carry. It finds a city. It finds a cradle. It finds a woman too tired to cry. And it finds a man preparing to kneel. You watch Hera's gaze settle on each moment like dew on morning leaves. She does not weigh them. She does not interfere. She simply witnesses. Because some things don't need altering. They just need to be honored. The sun dips lower, painting the sea in honey and rust. Hera doesn't leave, but she begins to walk, slow, barefoot, toward nothing in particular. You walk with her, and as you do, the world behind you balances quietly on the edges of thousands of small choices. No apples, no flames, just a quiet, divine hand making sure things still hold. Evening deepens into that soft indigo hour when shadows stretch long but haven't yet surrendered to night. You drift through the hush above a winding mountain path, the stone warm beneath where the sun kissed it all day. Far below, lanterns flicker to life in valleys like quiet stars scattered across earth instead of sky. Hera is already moving. She doesn't glide tonight. She walks. You follow at a distance, her steps measured, her robe brushing lightly against thyme and heather. She walks as if each step has memory, as if every bend in the trail once bore vows spoken and broken in equal measure. At a bend in the road, she pauses. There's a small shrine tucked into the rock wall. Not grand, just a ledge of stacked stones. One votive dish, a carved name almost worn away by weather. Someone has left a string of olive pits and a single flower. Hera touches none of it, but the flower straightens in its bowl. Down in the village below, a young couple sits by candlelight in the final hours of an argument. The kind of argument that started over nothing, mismatched expectations, an overheard sigh, and escalated until it wrapped around every other word they've ever spoken. Hera listens, but does not enter. Instead, she lingers near their door, letting time stretch just long enough for them to run out of heat. And when they do, she breathes once. The woman sighs. The man looks down, and the silence that follows isn't empty. It's healing. You return to the path beside Hera. She doesn't look at you, but you know she knows you're there. She moves on, downward, toward the lake that waits below the ridge like a secret. Its surface is black glass, still, reflective. She stands at the edge and looks in, not to admire herself, but to see the world she's kept steady. The stars begin appearing, one by one. You recognize constellations now shaped into stories she once influenced. Cassiopeia, Orion, and that strange scattering the mortals call the scales, which is not named for her, but always reminds you of her hand. A breeze moves across the lake. Not wind, not weather, just breath. And then a moment comes. One so small, so easy to miss, but so deeply Hera. A woman kneels in a distant city, alone, exhausted, a widow for 2 seasons now. She lights a lamp on her husband's shrine, not because she believes he'll hear, but because she made a promise. To honor, to remember. She whispers one word. Still. That's it. Still married. Still holding. Hera hears it from miles away and smiles. Faintly, but with something that runs deeper than happiness. Devotion. Because Hera's power was never about storms. It was about constancy. The unmoved mover. The root beneath the right of branches. The hand that steadies the cradle and the sword. You float beside her now as she sits by the lake. Not upon a throne. Not surrounded by worshippers. Just seated on a worn stone like any traveler. A night bird calls once. A fish breaks the surface. A tree shifts its leaves as if sighing in its sleep. And Hera closes her eyes. She's not tired, but she allows stillness to take her for a while, because even she knows the difference between rest and surrender. Above her, the stars continue multiplying. Below her, the world holds, not without pain, not without failure, but it holds, and that, for Hera, is everything. The night has now deepened to its quietest hour, the kind of quiet where even time seems to tread more softly. You drift above a field silvered with moonlight, the grass bent gently in one direction, as though the whole world is breathing in unison. You find Hera there, not in the sky, not in a hall of marble and gold, but sitting beside a fire in the mortal world. Just a small one. Someone else's, really? An old woman's campfire, lit beside a cart too heavy for one person to pull. The woman sleeps now, wrapped in a worn shawl. The fire crackles low. Hera watches. She does not wake the woman. She does not offer food or fortune. She simply keeps the flame from dying, because sometimes that's enough. You float higher, watching the world turn beneath her gaze. Far away, temples rise and crumble. Empires wheel into motion. Names that will fill history scrolls are being born this very moment, and not one of them knows it yet. But they will all be shaped, in ways large and small, by promises they didn't make, but will still be bound to. And that's Hera's domain. You return to Olympus just before dawn. The palace is quiet, not deserted, just sleeping. Even gods grow still sometimes. But one room is lit. You enter and find Aphrodite sitting alone, brushing her hair in long, slow strokes. She hums a melody no one else remembers. Her mirror reflects not her face, but a memory of Troy before the fall. A golden hall, a red apple, a prince's hand extended. She doesn't weep, she doesn't speak. But when Hera steps through the doorway, Aphrodite pauses. They look at each other, not like enemies, not even like rivals, just as forces that shape the world differently. Aphrodite sets the brush down. Hera, for once, breaks the silence. You lost the war. Aphrodite nods. And you, she says quietly, lost the story. They don't speak after that, because they both know it's true. Troy burns forever in song, but Hera rarely gets credit. She doesn't mind. The point was never the story, it was the balance restored. And balance, as always, doesn't need an audience. You leave them there and descend again into the world, where people are stirring, slowly, for another day. In a village by the sea, a fisherman kisses his wife's hand before heading out. It's habit now, but it still matters. In a mountain town, a midwife holds a newborn girl with hands that have caught 1,000 beginnings. In a city square, two people sign a contract with solemn faces and lock eyes for just 1 second longer than necessary. All of it Hera's, not hers in the way thrones are claimed, but in the way certain truths belong to gravity. You pass through the halls of courts and kitchens, where decisions are made that change nothing, and yet change everything. Who apologizes first? Who forgives second? Who chooses to stay when leaving would be easier? And Hera watches. In one home, a widow lights 2 candles instead of 1. For memory, for endurance, for the idea that something unglamorous can still be sacred. In another, a boy who once mocked old rituals now kneels beside his partner and asks a question with shaking hands. Not because he's sure, but because he's ready. These are Hera's temples now, not built in stone, but in moments. You sit beside her again, beneath a fig tree blooming in its off-season, a trick of climate, or maybe of will. She says nothing, but in the distance, a bell rings, one that marks the beginning of a ceremony, not a coronation, not a funeral, a wedding. And Hera rises. Morning breaks with a softness reserved for days when the wind has already whispered its intentions to the trees. You float above a hillside meadow, where sun spills like honey across terraces of olive trees, each leaf shimmering with dew. The earth exhales, slow and sure, the kind of breath you take after everything. And Hera is walking. She moves through the meadow at a measured pace, her robe brushing the wild lavender. The bees do not avoid her. Birds do not scatter. She belongs here as much as they do. Today, she carries nothing. No staff, no crown, just herself. Because today, she's not guiding, not correcting, not judging. She's remembering. You follow her to a flat stone nestled under an old olive tree. She sits with her back straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. In the distance, you see it too. Troy's ghost, faint and flickering. Not ruins, not smoke, just memory. And beside that ghost, another, Paris. Still foolish, still beautiful, still not entirely to blame. Helen appears, too, sometimes younger, sometimes older, depending on which story you choose to believe. The wine shifts, they vanish. Hera stays, because even gods must sit with the past now and then. You drift back toward the present with her. The world below is different, yet familiar. The names have changed. The rituals were new faces, but people still bind themselves together, still make promises with trembling hands, still break them, still try again. In a seaside town, a man kneels before a woman with a ring carved from driftwood. He stammers. She laughs. She says yes before he finishes the sentence. Hera smiles. In a quiet home, a woman writes a letter to her husband who has been gone too long. Not an angry letter, not a plea, just a reminder. We're still here. I'm still holding. Hera hears every word. Some scholars once claimed Hera's influence faded with the age of epic, that when the gods stopped meddling in wars, their stories lost power. But they were wrong, because Hera never needed war. She just needed structure, and structure remains. In temples, yes, but also in kitchens, in hospital waiting rooms, in long drives back home after terrible arguments. You move with her now into a crowded street, modern, bustling. The language has changed, but the rhythm is the same. You hear couples argue softly in the morning rush. Hear laughter exchanged mid-apology. Someone holds a door longer than necessary. Someone forgets an anniversary, then remembers in time to fix it. No one calls Hera's name here, but she is here. She is always where the bond stretches and does not break. You follow her into a courthouse, where two people sign the end of a marriage. There is no bitterness, just tired acceptance. Hera does not mourn the failure. She watches instead how they shake hands after, how they part with quiet dignity. Balance isn't staying at all costs, it's knowing when to let go with grace. In a train station, a grandmother gives her granddaughter a folded piece of paper. It's not a will, not a secret, just a recipe, passed down like inheritance. Hera lingers in that exchange longer than you expect. You ask her, silently, what she sees. She answers without sound. Continuity. You rise with her again into the clouds, where Olympus no longer glows like fire, but breathes like a garden at dusk. The gods are quieter now, their dramas cooled into stories. Ares teaches young soldiers how to mourn properly. Athena writes books no mortal will ever read. Hermes has taken up sketching. Even Aphrodite has mellowed, though she still makes mirrors fog up when bored. Hera walks among them like the spine of a library, not read aloud, but always supporting the weight. She returns to her throne, not golden, not high, just centered, and as she sits, the world turns again. One more marriage begins, one more vow is spoken, and across the sea, a child is born beneath a fig tree. The world holds, and Hera, as always, is watching. You've come full circle now. The stars wheel gently overhead, the earth hums below, and everything, is slower than it used to be, not decaying, just settled, like embers after fire, like laughter after ceremony, like vows remembered long after the altar has been taken down. Hera is quiet. You find her in the earliest light, before even the birds have cleared their throats. She's standing on a mountaintop, not Olympus, not some marble stack monument, but a real one, jagged, wild, covered in wine-shaped pine and speckled with moss. She's barefoot again. You land beside her. The air is thin, but she doesn't mind. This is where she comes when no one is looking, not to rule, not to correct, just to be. The horizon is wide here. Below, the valleys are stitched with towns waking up in slow choreography, bread ovens lit, infants crying, dogs stretched out in sunbeams. None of them know she's here, but she sees them. You think about that apple, the one tossed into a feast like a joke, a dare, a spark. You think about the rage that followed, the choices made, the ships built, the gates opened, and you realize none of it was random. It was all balance, a beautiful, imperfect rebalancing of stories to proud, cities to gilded, people to sure they were invincible. Hera didn't demand destruction. She just made sure forgetting her wasn't free. You watch her now as she kneels beside a small pool of melted snow. She scoops it in her hands and lets it run down her wrists, like ritual, like memory, and then she whispers, not a curse, not a command, just a name. You don't hear which. Somewhere, someone says yes to someone else. Somewhere, someone leaves. Somewhere, someone forgives. All of these are Hera's acts, not grand, not thunderous, but precise. She rises. Her eyes, as always, are forward. Back in the cities, the people still tell stories. Helen becomes a symbol, Paris a caution, Troy a myth, and Hera, a footnote, a complication, a jealous wife scribbled between columns of war. But you know the truth now. You've walked with her. You've seen the moments too quiet to be sung. And as Hera turns, her shadow long across the mountain stones, you realize something else. She is still watching, still shaping, still studying the world in the silence between choices, because even gods don't live in legends, they live in what comes after. So now, as we draw the story to a close, breathe a little deeper. Let your thoughts slow, like footsteps in soft sand. Let them drift gently back through the winding paths we followed tonight, through banquet halls and burning cities, quiet temples, and olive trees blooming out of season. Feel the weight of it all, not heavy, but grounding, because that's Hera's gift, not chaos, not noise, but the delicate reminder that everything meaningful is built in layers. Patience, choice, devotion. Picture yourself now lying in a quiet field under a sky dusted with stars. Nothing dramatic, just the cool brush of nighttime wind, the scent of laurel, the softest hum of distant water. Everything is balanced here. Nothing is rushing you. The gods are quiet, the world is turning, and Hera, somewhere far above, is watching, not to judge, not to interfere, but to hold the thread steady while you rest. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breath match the rhythm of the wind, and drift, backward, forward, inward. The story has ended. The balance holds. You are safe now. Sleep well. Good night.